We're joined now by the Lib Dem leader, Sir Ed Davey. Sir Ed, thank you very much indeed for joining us. You talk about ousting Boris Johnson from number 10, going to crush the Tory blue wall. It is a long ladder to climb, given the few MPs that you currently have. How do you plan on doing that?
We showed in the Cheshire and Amersham by-election at the beginning of the summer that Liberal Democrats could beat Conservatives even in true blue Buckinghamshire. And I've been arguing that there are a lot of seats in the blue wall across the south of England and indeed in other parts of the north, places like Cheadle and Hazel Grove and Greater Manchester, where actually Liberal Democrats are the ones who can beat the Conservatives in some of their heartlands. And when we listened to people in Cheshire and Amersham, they told us that they felt the Conservatives were taking them for granted. Some of them thought that Boris Johnson wasn't a decent Prime Minister. And I think if the Liberal Democrats can appeal to those voters and talk about the issues I was talking in my speech today, about education, giving parents new COVID catch-up vouchers, about carers, making sure we really have a supporting package for people, those looking after their loved ones, and small businesses and self-employed, giving people a chance to grow their businesses. I think if Liberal Democrats can appeal to parents, carers and business, I think we really have an opportunity to break through that brick wall.
You cite the victory in the Cheshire and Amersham by-election. You threw everything at that by-election, while Labour didn't give it a huge amount of energy. How do you translate that win when it comes to a general election?
Well, if you went back a month or so before the Cheshire and Amersham by-election, there were the local election results. And across these blue wall seats that I'm talking about in places like Wiltshire and Surrey, Hertfordshire, Oxfordshire, Cambridgeshire, Liberal Democrats made big gains against the Conservatives. So that sort of backs up what I'm saying. And in quite a lot of the local election results since, we've been beating the Conservatives in these areas. And we're getting the same message wherever we go in these seats. Conservative voters, traditional Conservative voters, lifelong Conservative voters, pretty fed up with Boris Johnson. They don't think he shares their values. They don't think they're listening to him. They think they're taking them for granted. And they're liking what we're saying, that we want to invest in their children's education and so on. So that's why I think there's a lot of evidence, not just the Cheshire by-election, but lots of other elections in real elections with people casting their vote, switching from Conservatives to the Liberal Democrats.
The numbers, though, polling from YouGov, voting intention tracker, remains low, stays at around 5 to 10%. The English local elections from May, you only gained one council seat. So I'm just wondering what your strategy is. Are you going big across the board? Or are you going to target those individual seats? And if so, what? Are you looking at Dominic Raab's in Esher and Walton, for example?
Well, there will be particular seats where we campaign particularly hard. You mentioned Esher and Walton with Dominic Raab. He's certainly in our sights. But there are many others where the Conservatives now are worried about the Liberal Democrat threat. It's very interesting. We made one of our issues in the Cheshire and Amersham by-election, when we beat them so handsomely, we made one of the issues planning reforms, because the Conservatives were proposing to give developers lots of power and take it away from local communities. They were proposing to not require developers to build affordable homes for young people. And we opposed that. We made it an issue in the Cheshire and Amersham by-election, and it looks like those planning reforms might be withdrawn by the Conservatives because they're so worried that we might repeat our success in Cheshire and Amersham. So I'm pleased the Conservatives are having to listen to the Liberal Democrats and the people of Cheshire and Amersham, and I think it shows that in these sorts of areas we have the Tories on the run.
Isn't power sharing realistically the only way that you are going to be able to enact change? You say you're now resolutely anti-Tory, you're positioning yourself that way, but would you consider a coalition again?
Well, as the Conservatives have been taking people for granted, I'm not going to. Our criticism of the Conservatives have not listened to people and responded to their concerns, whether it's on education, whether it's on care, whether it's on business. And I'm determined that we don't, therefore, prejudge the next election. Let us wait. Let's try and see if we can do these victories that I think we can. I believe if we show a distinctive...
But look at 2019, you only won 11 seats. That's why I'm saying realistically it's not going to happen, is it?
Well, I think we're second to the Conservatives now in 80 seats. If we won even just a small number of those, Boris Johnson could lose his majority. So that's why I say Liberal Democrats...
But it doesn't give you a majority.
A wider movement. Well, we're certainly not suggesting that. Again, we're not going to take the voters for granted. What I am saying is that we can beat Conservatives in key seats that they need to hold, and if we do beat them, that is part of a wider movement that will get Boris Johnson out of Downing Street.
You called today for a focus on recovery. You've pledged to cut national insurance for small business. You've pledged a Green Deal paid for with a Green Investment Fund. Where does the money come from? Would voters see more tax under the Liberal Democrats? And if so, how does that work with targeting the Tory blue wall?
Well, as we've always done at elections, we produce costed manifestos. And indeed, the last election, our manifesto was seen as not just the most progressive on the environment and on social care and education, but also the most fiscally responsible. So we will be fiscally responsible. But you've got to look at the situation at the moment. Our economy is in a mess. We've had one of the worst impacts on our economy on hitting many businesses than we can ever remember. And if we're going to get out of this, if we're going to recover, we have to invest. Investment is critical.
So tax rises,
is critical
you
for
mean?
tackling the climate change. Well, a lot of this investment, I actually think, comes from borrowing. Let me go back to education. We've taken the figures from the government's own advisor, Kevin Collins, who called for a 15 billion catch-up fund for schools and young people and children. We agree with him. And what we've seen elsewhere, that the impact of the loss of education, the loss of learning for people, which parents are rightly so worried about, is hugely costly for the economy. So if we invest in children's future, if we invest in our schools and help parents support their children better with these COVID catch-up vouchers I've been talking about, that is the way to get a real return for the taxpayer and for the country. That's the way to invest in the future, investing in our children.